fans, Rick here again from Drone Valley. I'm here today because I'm really excited about the recently released Part 107 of the FAA Rules and Regulations for Commercial Droning. If you've been following this issue for some time, you're very aware that this has been out in draft format for quite some time. A lot of us had read through that. There were things in there that were a little bit troublesome that we were hoping would change by the time it was released in its final form, and they actually did improve a lot of it. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just going through the highlights, and then I'm going to do a bunch of other videos talking through some aspects of the test and maybe how to study for the test and what the different sections are on. But this one I wanted to get out pretty quickly to give you my impressions of the good stuff that's in there and maybe how it's different than it used to be. So what you've got with this new regulation is a clear path to licensure for commercial operation of small vehicles like drones and things in that category. What I like about it a lot is that the other process, the old process, was you would have to file for a 333 exemption, which basically involved a lot of paperwork that was fairly complex to fill out. A lot of people involved a lawyer, and that could be thousands of dollars to get all that paperwork filled out, and then you have to wait. And if you made a single mistake on the application, you have to refile again. And even if you got it perfect and delivered it in pristine format to them, it could take 60 days all the way up to 9 months to get an approval. Once that certificate showed up in the mail and you got your approval, you still had to have a certified pilot in charge of the vehicle when it was flying. So for me as a small guy, it didn't make sense financially to do that. Even though I want to help out a lot of real estate agents near my house that need pictures of houses done for their listings, or maybe some of my footage could be used commercially, I couldn't afford that process and the certified pilot to do the footage. So I was really anxious to hear that this had been approved, and I'll go through some of the highlights in a minute. The other reason I'm excited about it, and this is something that may be lost on a lot of the people writing the articles on the internet, is that this is the first time the FAA has really separated what they call regular pilots from drone pilots. We're both considered pilots, but they're a different class of pilots. So by considering this the drone community a pilot, it adds a body of seriousness to it, if you will. So you're not just out flying a toy. You've now gone through certification, you followed the regulations, you've been approved by the FAA to fly this product. So when people around you may give you a hard time about flying a drone on the beach, or if you're being respectful when you're flying it, you can say, I'm a certified pilot on this drone. It's not like I'm just some weekend guy who fires up the batteries and goes out and flies this thing. It gives you a little bit more gravitas when you're out there flying it. Plus you can use all your footage commercially as long as you play by the rules. So I think it's nice because the future of drones really depends on the FAA taking them seriously, and by creating this separate class of aircraft, they've now got at least a framework to develop further rules, which I'm sure they'll expand the use of these drones over time. So some of the highlights that I found interesting, for starters, the basics are that you have to be able to speak and write and read English. Clearly, you've got to be in control of your mental faculties. You have to be in a position physically to be able to fly the thing. So they don't want you intoxicated. They don't want you, in that state of mind when you're flying the drone, which makes perfect sense. 16 years of age, which used to be 17 in the proposed regulations, so 16 years of age, which is great. You still have to register the drone, so if it's over half a pound, all the way up to 55 pounds, it has to be registered. Makes a lot of sense. A couple of interesting highlights that are new. You can actually carry things with the drone now. So before you couldn't carry anything attached to the drone. It was just the drone itself. This new regulation provides for the drone plus up to 55, well I should say the total weight of the drone plus what it's carrying can't be over 55 pounds. I don't know really what that's going to do. I don't think people are going to be using them for delivery, but I think it kind of opens a crack in the door, if you will, for Amazon, with the remote delivery service that they're looking at and other carriers are looking at. So maybe that's in there because of that. For me, that's not that big a deal. I just found it really interesting. The ceiling height is still 400 feet. In the proposal, it was 500 feet. They've knocked that down to 400 feet. That kind of leaves a buffer, I guess, between the ceiling for drones and sort of the basement, if you will, for commercial airliners. So there's 100-foot or better than 100-foot clearance between the two, which I guess builds in a safety buffer, and that's fine. The only time you can violate that 400-foot ceiling is if you're near a building. And when they say in close proximity to a building, they mean 400 feet of a building or a structure. So if you're flying near a commercial structure and you can exceed that 400 feet because you may have to do surveillance above it or surveying above it. So that's kind of interesting. They've also, which is a big deal for me, they've lifted the restrictions on airports in Class G, which for me is an airport that doesn't have a control tower. You still have restrictions around commercial airports, and anything that's got an active control tower, you've got to actually call in and get permission to fly within 5 miles of it. But I live out in sort of a rural part of New Jersey, and when I bring up that before you fly application, wherever I decide to fly, there's always really literally 3 or 4 farms around me that have permits for crop dusters or helicopters or things like that. So for me, before I fly, I've got to send a notice to all those different places to let them know that I'm putting a drone up. That all goes away now. So the Class G airports, which is most of where I fly, I don't even have to notify them. Now I do have relationships with a lot of them, so I'll probably still let them know when I'm going up, but it does take a lot of that work off my back. Some other things that are interesting, the test itself is going to be a computer-aided test. At this point, there are going to be 5 sections on the test. There'll be a total of 60 questions. A passing grade will be 70% of the test, so you can only miss 18 questions out of 60. There'll be study guides out very quickly. I'm sure there are companies probably furiously working on these as we speak to build in study guides to get you ready for the test and taking the test. At this point, I think the cost of the test is approximately $150. You don't need anybody to endorse you to take the test. You just go there, you set up at one of the 700 plus centers across the U.S. and I'll have a link for that below. A lot of them are local to your locations, and you go in and take the test and you're done with it. And you pass or fail at that point. The only other regulation that's in there, or I should say stipulation that's in the regulation, is the fact that you have to be cleared for TSA. So TSA is going to do a background check on you, make sure you're not a bad guy. And if you pass that test and you pass the TSA screening, you get your license and you're off and running. So I think this whole thing is going to take a couple more weeks yet. I think it's 60 days exactly from the date it was published in the National Register to when it becomes law. So sometime in August, I think the date they're talking about now is August 27th, but I think you can still get ready for it and probably take that test well in advance of it so you're ready for licensure when that thing hits. The only thing that is still kind of in gray area is the restrictions on drone flights in general. Now I know right now temporarily the National Park System has banned drone flights in any of the national parks. Some of the state parks have bans on them as well. It's kind of a gray area at this point. They're typically or technically not allowed to ban those flights unless there are large groups of people there or you're posing an undue hazard to the area. But I know a lot of localities have decided they put their own rules in. The FAA is really the ultimate guide on all this kind of stuff, and the FAA says it's okay. It should be okay to fly there. But I always check when I see people in the park or I see a ranger in the park. I may ask him, hey, I'm going to put a drone up. Is that a big deal? Honestly, 9 times out of 10, they are really interested in the drone and have no problem with me flying it whatsoever, as long as I stay away from large crowds and I don't annoy people by flying too low. So I think those still play pretty well. I would just check, if you're going to be flying around large groups of people, obviously you can't fly over them, you can fly near them. But if there's somebody of authority in the area, you might want to ask him before you put the drone up, just not to be annoying in space. So I just wanted to get a quick video out there to let you know that 107 is live. It's been published. You can find all the information on the web, and again, I'll have some links below that you can check. I'm very excited about it. I think it really is the dawn of a new age for drone users like myself, because it provides a framework for the FAA to really develop other rules. Because today, again, one of the restrictions is visual line of sight. You can't fly beyond line of sight. There's some conversations in the background that I've heard rumblings about that they may extend that, right, to be able to use first-person view. That would be wonderful, because today a lot of us fly, as far as we can see the drone, but when you get out there and it gets cloudy, you can't really go very far with it, so unless you have a really high vantage point. So having first-person view looking through that viewfinder, or if you're wearing goggles, would be wonderful if they do that. So I think having the basics in play now, they'll experiment with extending it in different directions over time. So anyway, that's all I wanted to get to today, just to get you introduced to this product and sort of talk a little bit about 107, what it looks like. And again, I will have some follow-up videos that go into deeper detail around the test questions, the different sections you're going to know. From what I can tell looking through it, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. It seems like any other test you could study for. It'll be multiple choice, so that should make it simpler. A lot of this stuff would be things that you know already if you're a responsible drone operator, so I don't really think there's kind of any tricky math on there or anything like that, any constellation mapping or any of that kind of nonsense. I think it'll be a pretty straightforward test that anybody that studies a little bit could pass it. So good luck with that, and stay tuned because we're going to have a lot of updates on this, but exciting times ahead. Very excited. Have a great day.